Welcome to what is the Scottish Union for Education, what we hope will be just one of many events across the whole of Scotland asking the question, are schools harming children by affirming their transgender identity? And I'd like to start with one simple question and proposition. Is the idea that children can be born in the wrong body, or that we all have a gender identity, is that an accepted fact or a contested idea? And I'd suggest the very fact that you are sitting here today would suggest that it is a contested idea. Schools, especially primary schools, are not there to promote contested ideas as facts. But as it stands here in part 3 of the relationship education, on the curriculum, we have a lesson being taught to 11-year-old children entitled Being Transgender, that promotes these highly contested ideas as facts. That, I would suggest, cannot be right. Perhaps when children are 15 or 16, schools could debate these subjects with arguments for and against. And I don't think we can hide from this issue because it's out there in society. But this is not what we're seeing in schools. And crucially, councils and head teachers do not have to teach this. They have a choice. And I think it is our responsibility, all of us in this room, to encourage them to, at the very least, consider an alternative approach. Just to let you know, the Scottish Union for Education is a union that was set up a year ago and set up for parents, communities and also for teachers who are concerned about the way that some aspects of education appear to be becoming a form of indoctrination. Put simply, all we want is for schools to be schools, and for teachers and head teachers to realise that this is not their job to teach children their values. It's their job to teach them maths and English and history and geography and the sciences. It's as simple as that. Since setting up, we've been contacted by parents and teachers across the country who have a variety of concerns, many of them to do with the relationship education classes. And we hope to become a national union that can represent parents and teachers' concerns about what is happening in schools. And one of our first initiatives, as well as these public events, will be to publish, print and send to every school a pamphlet by Dr. Jenny Cunningham explaining why they should stop promoting a transgender curriculum. You'll hopefully have received the leaflet that Jenny has produced, and feel free to take some away with you if you want to give them to friends, neighbours, and especially to your children's schools or your grandchildren's schools. On the leaflet you'll see our details, and we're very keen for people to get in touch to let us know your concerns and issues at your school. You'll also see a link to our Substack, which is basically our website, and we have a weekly production of the website relating to these issues and many others. And also trying to reflect your experiences to a wider audience so that people start to have a public discussion about this. You can read the Substack for free, or you can become a member of the union and pay to subscribe. The latter is preferable. It's £25 a year, which isn't much, and it's going to help us do these sort of events across the country. And as I say, we need your money for events like this. We also need it because we had to pay for private security because of the threats that we received from anti-fascist type individuals. And I'm very grateful to have them here. You'll have noticed also on the one of the leaflets, Jenny's leaflets, there's a cheeky little note with our bank details on it. So feel free to donate to us. And if you're old-fashioned and still carry money, We have a little money tin at the back, and we would like that little money tin to be full, because it's cost us £216 just for security before anything else. So you can help reimburse if you're feeling flush. Okay, that's the begging over. And now introduce the speakers, which I am, everyone says they're delighted these speakers have come, whether they are delighted or not. But this time I mean it. And I'd like to introduce them. They'll each speak for a maximum of 10 minutes. That's so that you can have your voice heard, which is as, if not more important. First, we have Jim Sillars, former deputy leader of the SNP, who, in my opinion, is always a breath of fresh air. In a world where politicians often appear to lack principles, it's nice to know that once upon a time we actually had men and women of quality and intelligence running our institutions. Next, we have Maggie Mellon, who I worked with on the No to Name Person campaign, and someone who, again, is not only an impressive individual, but as a social work expert is prepared to speak out on issues she knows are not going to make her many friends. After Maggie, we have Ewan Gurr, and I think of as a young man, but that's probably because I'm old. Ewan has many hats. He is a Christian, he is, I suppose you could call a community worker, and he is a columnist for the Evening Telegraph. And again, he's demonstrated many times he is prepared to challenge the accepted wisdoms of the day in that column. And finally, we have Dr. Jenny Cunningham, a South African dissident who fled the country following her campaigning against apartheid, who came to Scotland and was a community paediatrician for over 30 years, is now a board member of the Scottish Union for Education. So we've got a political dissident doctor, a Christian columnist, I don't know if Maggie will accept this, but I'm throwing it out there anyway. We have a left-wing feminist social worker and a former leading politician of Scottish nationalism. It sounds like the start of a bad joke. But hopefully it is the start of a campaign and movement across Scotland to bring back common sense into our schools. Please, could we have a round of applause for all our speakers? And we will start with Mr. Jim Sillars. Thank you.
I've got fire brigade needs. I don't have the experience on this subject that other members of the Speakers panel have. I am a politician whose main interest is in international affairs and the development of geopolitical changes now underway and how these will affect relations between states. And you might wonder, what's he going on about? Although this meeting's subject is about policies being applied in Scottish schools, I want to explain how I see it in a wider Western and world context, as well as what's happening in this nation. That so many in the Western world lack the courage to uphold a biological truth and so label trans ideology as a lie, and are prepared to stand aside while children in schools are fed that lie, is one manifestation of a much wider malaise eating away at what was previously our greatest strength. That's freedom of thought, articulated in freedom of speech, in which turn gifted us with the intellectual instrument of rigorous interrogation of public policy, and a social sphere, interrogation of public policy in a social sphere where tolerance and willingness to be offended was taken as normal. When a lie about biology is punted as truth and taught as such, it destroys the magic of childhood, subverts the adolescent, and carries a long-term price, inflicting on Western society through our children as they become citizens that fatal weakness that comes from hollowing out the character of a people at precisely the time when strength of character and an ability to address harsh realities will be called for. There's a warning in the words of the Colombian philosopher, Nicolas Gomez Davila. Each civilization dies from indifference towards the unique values which created it. Now, governments in a democracy promote education for two principal reasons. One is moral, that it is in the interest of a child to be enabled to read, write, have an extensive vocabulary, so that he or she can communicate intelligently with others, to stimulate a thirst for knowledge and understanding as a means by which all can exercise autonomy and are fit to govern themselves in concert with their peers. That is where parental interest comes in, that first duty of a state. There is a second duty on a state, and it's a self-interest from the state's point of view. It is essential for the continued existence of the state that its people are a match for others in other states in their ability to be innovative, productive, competitive, and able to create wealth in order that the state's public responsibilities can be met by the state. Those principles are paramount in Western societies at a time when great geopolitical changes are taking place. The rise and rise of Asia. I had lunch the other day with a friend of mine whose company operates from Hong Kong, and he's an expert in Asia. He's a Scot. And he told me about Vietnam. He said the Vietnamese people are still poor, but they are investing massively in education. And he said, I'll tell you this, a Vietnamese student in English, writing, maths and science could wipe the floor with students in Scotland today. So we're watching the rise and rise of Asia, where the dynamic energy of peoples released from a past that constrained their development is a challenge to the West in both economic and political times. For the first time in 100 years, for about the last 300 years, the Atlantic axis, that is Europe and North America, has ruled this world. That has now changed. In both economic and political terms, that's the big change that's happening underway at the present time. So how Asia, Africa, which is joining in the change, and the West accommodate the legitimate interests of each, how the world economically and politically adjusts to a new balance. That is the conundrum which our children and our grandchildren will have to solve in the years ahead of them. In that world which is now to come, they will face tough decisions, and they need to be armed with a strong collective strength of character, an ability to apply robust thinking, face uncomfortable facts, and find a way through a maze of political, philosophic, ideological paths of a complexity that previous generations who took Western hegemony for granted could never understand. When I was a boy, if you wanted to say something was really bad, you said it was in a worse state than China. And if you look at the Olympic Games in London in 1948, what's noticeable isn't the states that took part, it's the states that didn't take part because they weren't states at that particular time. But now, who would ever dream of saying that you're in a worse state than China? It just simply doesn't apply. And how our children accommodate to the new balance that is going to be imposed on this world is extremely important. Does anyone who is rational and has even a tiny inkling of the world now entering one of its great epochal transformations believe that deflecting our young children and their older brothers and sisters into the swamp of trans ideology and promoting it as if equal in value to science, maths, writing, reading, thinking critically, is preparing them for the world they will have to make a living in? Too many people who should know better in schools, universities, business and government have caved in to a minority in a trans community with a large megaphone, with some in the highest places asking us to accept the absurd proposition that it is difficult to define a woman. A woman is a human being, easy to define, as one with double X chromosomes, with a cervix, a womb, with a quite distinctive body mass, who has unique bodily functions and faces medical conditions not applicable to those other humans with XY chromosomes. There is nothing in that chromosome differences that bars a female loving a female, or a male loving a male, or a female loving a male, or a male loving a female. But there is no legislation, there is no power in the hands of humankind that actually, using legislation, can make the double X become an XY or vice versa, or convert them into a third variety. We have descended in the public sphere to what can only be described objectively as a level of nonsense. Precious minutes and hours that should be devoted to the true purpose of education are being spent on indoctrination by a tiny minority who know not or care the damage they are doing. It is time that the adults in our society come out of the closet they are hiding in, assert common sense, and ensure that we are giving our children the education they need based on the solid foundation that biology does not lie. If we in the West keep denying that truth, and there are many who do, while Asia's growing middle classes invest in real education as the means by which their children will be superbly equipped in the competitive economic stakes that we are now, and my children and grandchildren will now enter, then it will be no contest if we keep up our present policies. Asia will win, and our people will get poorer and poorer, not only in Scotland, but in the West, where our intellectual capacity, our character, is being hollowed out by a false ideology. One of the great legacies of Scottish history is the Enlightenment, a great legacy that we have from the past, although some in Edinburgh University seem to be unaware of it. That great legacy should be the legacy of today's young people. Enlightenment and truth are partners. Enlightenment dies in the shadow, the deep shadow of a lie. That is no place on which to lay down the heads and minds of our children. We are involved now in a major ideological dispute. And unless we win that ideological dispute, then we are going to do enormous harm to the future economic prospects, not only of our children, but of everybody in Western society. What you are engaged in is not a minor Scottish matter. You are part of a wider movement which is now saying we will have no more of the lie implanted on our children. And good luck to you.
Follow that. I think that, I mean, it's very good to actually have the whole issue put in the context of world politics and the international situation. So I in some ways it's quite good to be following Jim, because I was a bit worried I would only have the same things to say as the rest of the panel, but I'm getting to go first on that side of things. So first of all, I want to thank Stuart and the Scottish Union for Education for inviting me to talk tonight. It's really good to see a new organisation formed and beginning to organise in this area, and I think this is a fantastic, good organised event. It's got a good attendance, it feels good. So I'm going to talk about, as asked, about what's being taught in schools and why we should be concerned about it. But first, I am going to talk about fear and the impact of fear, because fear has been so important in creating the climate that we have today. A climate of cancellation of people, of books, of meetings, cancellation of evidence, of opinions, of facts, a climate where disciplinary action, complaints, bullying, sacking has silenced dissent across health, education, social work, the civil service, and even in John Lewis, sadly, I found out that where wokeness has taken over, and that big British institution based on partnership modelling is now being riven with this whole gender ideology. But on the issue of the major institutions of the Scottish and the British state have been captured by this ideology, and people are working and living in fear. They might not know it, some people might not, it might not have come to them yet, but it will come if they ask. So, and then everyone in this room must have had some fears about coming to this meeting, about the threat and the anger, about the meeting just taking place, and you worry about your own personal safety, you worry about your rights. For some of us, we fear about our jobs and our families. And I know teachers, nurses, social workers, doctors who've all fallen foul of their employers or their professional regulators. And the regulators have fallen or remained silent. In my own field, I know social workers who've been disciplined for challenging or just questioning the reality or how to approach this whole issue of gender ideology, and what passes for leadership in social work has actually created an oppressive and dangerous working environment which makes the protection of children from harm secondary to the belief in gender identity and all that goes with it. So, having felt that fear, just imagine being a child today, particularly a teenager. Things that you can and you can't say in school, questions that you can't ask, don't get people's pronouns wrong, don't remember the new rules which are changing every day about what's right and what's not, don't upset anyone. Bullying, cancellation and ostracisation that we all worry about in our professional or working lives is a reality for children today. Whatever they say about being kind and being anti-bullying, because even if the children don't agree and don't believe, why would they say so? Their teachers have also been told not to question. And I mean, I think the harm is done on two levels. There's harm that's done to children who come to believe that they are born in the wrong body, they're transgender. There's a harm as well to all children who don't actually believe it, but they are being damaged by being forced to believe or pretend to believe an absolute lie, to deny the reality of their own senses, and also to be asked to believe that their parents are stupid. That their parents who have told them, you're a boy, you're a girl, we know why, and the doctors, this is what you are, and they're being told, no, you can just dismiss all that, your parents don't know. And the authority of parents to manage bringing up children in this environment, in this culture, is being eroded. And I have to say, the protesters also expressed a lot of fear. They fear that any meeting like such as this could take place where people are able to freely discuss whether gender identity exists is so dangerous that it should be stopped. Now, I defend the right of people who believe in gender identity to have meetings and to be able to promote their theories to anyone who'll listen to them. They don't have a lot of meetings, though, to address the public, tell us all about it. But what they don't have is any right to say that no one else is allowed to have meetings. But anyway, as adults holding this meeting, the Scottish Union for Education and all of us, we are standing up to fear. We are the grown-ups who've come into the room. And no debate, I think, is now officially dead. Isla Graham and the Scottish Parliament's dumb insolence in insisting on passing legislation to allow rapists to terrorise women on bail and in prisons has actually put an end to it. It made discussion broke out across Scotland, which was wonderful. My best experience was in the fish shop, going to buy the fish, and the fish man said something to me. I had a badge on or something. Anyway, the whole fish shop started talking about it, and that was like, and you just know, that's the debate is now out in the open. So the facts, as Stuart said, sex is a biological fact. Yes, there are a few children whose sex is not immediately obvious. There are very, very, very few children, and they have conditions of differences. Jennifer might talk about this. But all children have a sex, either male or female. The fact is that sex is not an inner truth, that it's a physical reality, which if you're a woman, you know only too well. But the existence of gender identity, on the other hand, is not a fact, it's a theory. And Stuart has talked about this. Children are being taught in school at a young age as part of our national curriculum that there is an innate gender identity, my watch talks to me, that may differ from a child's sex. It makes up for not having any friends, as Stuart said. So, in fact, there's no major study of children's psychology and child development ever. No major study ever has found any evidence of an innate gender identity in children. Nobody ever studied thousands of children and went, oh my goodness, there's a gender identity. Understanding the distress of gender dysphoria in children was a very niche, small area of practice in child psychiatry until relatively recently. And it normally related to a small number of boys who expressed persistent, consistent and troubled feelings of discomfort with their sex bodies. And this was sometimes accompanied by a strong wish or belief to be a female instead of a boy. So the recommended practice then was of watchful waiting for these children until after puberty, because most of these cases resolved once puberty had completed. I've got some theories about why it was boys and not girls that were mainly affected by this, and I cut them out because of the time constraints, but I think it's interesting to reflect on the pressures on those boys not to be a sissy or a homosexual, whereas girls were actually allowed to be tomboys and encouraged to be tomboys. So we had loads of wonderful role models in the 1960s and 70s, or before that, of girls in books who were tomboys. Boys didn't have role models for not being alpha males or whatever. So I think that might be a reason. And now, of course, girls are massively being affected by transgender identity. So that was then, and now all children are exploring their gender identity in school. So there's two key texts in schools. One is relationship, sexual health and parenthood, and the other is the guidance for supporting transgender children. and both of them have got government support and they're backed by Education Scotland and various other bodies. There's also an NHS protocol on gender reassignment, which sets out medical pathways for gender reassignment, including for children, starting with children, and it goes right through, and it's a pathway that ends in sterilisation, major surgery, actually that's what Harriet Cass in the Cass Review found, that this is the pathway that children are set on. And they define being transgender in childhood as a natural and innate condition, like being fair or tall or having blue eyes or brown eyes. And they claim that it is not a belief but a fact, that it's innate and not socially induced. They use the term transgender and trans as umbrella terms, they say, for those whose gender identity differs from the sex assigned at birth. We've all heard these phrases now, the sex assigned at birth. The sex which every parent knows when their child is born, and every doctor and nurse knows whether a child is a boy or a girl. So the lesson plans for children from about P4 onwards is that being transgender is taught on the same level as the facts of life. What is the facts of life? Of conception, contraception, pregnancy, etc. Being transgender is now taught on that level. And it's also being sold, I think, as a children's rights issue. But it's not a children's rights issue. Childhood is a special state which brings with it the right to be protected by adults from harm. When children were led out of town by the Pied Piper, was it the children's right to be allowed to follow if they wanted? No, it wasn't, and it was the adult's duty to stop that, and that was a failure of protection then. I mean, no, it didn't happen, but just to be clear, but just in the analogy, children don't have a right to choose things that they have no knowledge of the consequences of. And actually, interestingly, there's very few references to children in the guidance. If you do a search terms, what you get is young people, transgender young people, without distinction between primary or secondary, or whether they're over or under 16 or 12, which I think is very telling, because it speaks to the removal of protections of childhood from children. Adultification and the sexualisation of children in childhood is what has been happening. And some of the materials that are provided with the curriculum, the Little American Films, are truly pretty awful and shocking. So, how am I doing for time? Am I all right?
Couple of minutes.
So the guidance, when it first came out, met up with a real furore, and it was, and it told, it said children should be allowed to use the toilets that they wanted, they should be affirmed, and it was withdrawn immediately, by government. But being withdrawn didn't stop the guidance being used, and it has continued to, it's now been reissued again without much change, and it's continued to be implemented by schools during the period when it was being rewritten. And the current government, the current guidance, which is now issued and endorsed by, written and published by government, has fudged but not changed advice that any child of any age can be socially transitioned in school with or without their parents' knowledge or consent. Preferably it says with consent, but then if the parent objects and refuses, it advises that parents should be referred for child protection investigation, which is of course terrifying, because it means the idea that you might lose your children. And it really means is the state owns your children, if you allow that to happen. The state owns our children and decides what's in our children's best interest. And parents, as I said, we're stupid, we don't know, and we could be sidelined. It doesn't take an expert in child development to raise questions about this. Since gender identity has been taught as a fact, the number of girls referred to the health service as transgender, that is identifying as boys, has increased by over 5,000% in just over 10 years. That is every girl. For every girl before, which were very, very few, there's now 500. There has been an increase in boys too, but not on this scale. It's phenomenal scale. And it's obvious that there is social contagion going on, but as well as that, some of the pressures on girls. So we've seen the extent of the harms caused, but on the plus side, in England, the NHS Cass Review interim report established that there wasn't an evidence base for any of this. Amazing, isn't it? Not an evidence base for surgery on children for even social transitioning of children, which is, as Harriet Cass pointed out, is not a neutral act. You're making a major intervention in a child's normal development into adulthood by actually changing their identity, their name, how they present to the world. I can't see how anybody could not see that is incredibly damaging. So, but on the hopeful side, the tide seems to be turning, at least in Northern Europe and places where we've managed to get hold of it. But we have to consider the harms that have been done. A whole generation taught a harmful and unevidenced ideology, and no wonder mental health of children is causing concerns. I mean, the same people that are weeping about it are the ones that are causing it. In terms of who's responsible, I don't think it's those people out there. We shouldn't get involved in silly arguments on Twitter and whatever. I think our firepower should be directed at people in positions of power who should have stopped this, including government, directors of education and social work, health boards, children's charities, and children's charities like the Children First and the NSPCC, who like to create moral panics about child protection and then have actually created a major child harm and are refusing to actually budge from it. So I think what we're seeing now is going to be, well, hopefully it will become one of the biggest scandals of education and health in the years to come. But Jim's kind of more like bigger understanding of it. I hope it gets to be a big scandal, and I hope that we get to see it and the people responsible for it held to account for what they've done. So thank you.
Testing. Good evening, how are you all? I'm going to set my timer because I have a tendency to talk, so the timer is now on. First of all, well done for being here. It would have been very easy for many of you to turn around and go home at the sight of the Salvation Army outside. But also, as the one panellist from Dundee, I would like to welcome you to the promised land. So, my name is Ewan Gar. My preferred pronouns are he and him. As a Christian, I feel at home tonight in this church building. I'm not going to, no plans to speak in tongues, but the first thing I think I want to say tonight is I feel very humbled to be on this panel with some of the people here. I mean, I just had the opportunity only a few months ago to interview Jim Sillars in Glasgow, read his book, and to be on a panel with some of these folk who I've heard at various conferences, various events over the years, I think is a real privilege. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a crisis of identity all around us. Never before have the questions of who we are, and what we are here to do been so prevalent. And there's nothing wrong with those questions. Those questions are asked all the time in churches. But the fact that we've got to a point where our politicians are so lost in this kind of intellectual cul-de-sac where no one can answer with any sort of biological literacy what a woman is, shows us where we've really got to as a nation. Never have I seen a time where the words penis and cervix were uttered more by politicians than words like education, healthcare, and welfare. If you're standing there saying, give me an example, I'll give you one. Do you know that it was not until the last of the 3 televised leadership debates that our current First Minister, Humza Yousaf, who ironically is a Glasgow MSP but lives in this city, go figure, it was the last of the 3 televised leadership debates before he deigned to mention the word education. And it was, do you know what? It was the second televised leadership debate before he even mentioned the NHS, which just happened to be his brief at the time. This is madness. How did we get to this state? Yeah. So, for all their talk, and for all his, I mean, he uses this term a lot, for all their talk about serving the people's priorities, never has there been a time where so many of them are spectacularly incapable of telling us what a person or what people even are. So what can be done to recover the lost ground? First, I think we need to identify what the ailment is to which we wish to administer an antidote. How do you know what the solution is unless you know what the problem is? And I think we need to be able to articulate that. The biggest disaster, I think, has been the extent to which we have outsourced influence over our children to technology, to influencers, and sadly, even, yes, to education. I'm going to go through those one by one very briefly. Firstly, to technology. The Financial Times magazine had an article just this weekend. It's usually a brilliant magazine, but it had an article about toxic masculinity. So I thought I better address the toxicity that resides within me. I should educate myself. In the UK, there's this phrase that in the UK, 91% of 11-year-olds have a phone. It also indicated that the average child with a mobile phone currently spends around 5 hours per day on their phones. I mean, having a constant stream of input, especially during puberty or as you're approaching puberty, from people who, for instance, transgender influencers who are telling you that if you don't feel comfortable in your body, you might want to change it. I mean, every one of us probably felt uncomfortable in our own bodies when we were that age. Some of us still do. I mean, seriously, I'm not joking here. Abigail Shrier in her book, Irreversible Damage, said girls during puberty feel alienated from a body that is pummeling them from the inside. The stress brought on by puberty is age old, but what is new is today's adolescents' relative inability to bear it. And she says, and the constant presence of alternatives. This brings me to point number 2, which is the concerning rise of influencers. Some recent and very disturbing polling has shown that children trust influencers more than, get this, newspapers, social media, and in the worst cases, even their parents. When we are willingly exposing our sons to the influence of basically grown-up infants, like Andrew Tate and KSI, the latter of which, used to post videos regularly about his rape face, or the other who many of you will know has been arrested for alleged crimes relating to human trafficking. That is disturbing. These are the people that we expect to teach our boys about what masculinity is. Good God, have mercy on us. I mean, I don't know about you, but does anybody, let's see a show of hands, does anybody remember their curricular experience of sex education? How many are we? Right, probably about 60 to 70% of people in the room. Let me tell you about mine's. Yeah, I recall vividly the day that I and my primary school peers were offered a book and confronted with images of a fairly sturdy male and hirsute female, both of which who were completely naked, as the teacher cautiously and carefully selected a reluctant victim to read the associated text. And the eventual prey tried with limited success to read the words that were welded around these two denuded figures, while tempestuously seeking to smother her titters, sniggers, and guffaws. It wasn't a pleasant experience, and it isn't any more of a pleasant experience now. I'm a dad of 4 children. My wife and I, and this brings me to the final of those 3 things, which is education. My wife and I recently had a 4th son. We called him Knox, named after John Knox, who many of you will know, some of you may not, but in this fantastic book, which, Jim perfectly set it up. It's called The Scottish Enlightenment. It's a fantastic book by a guy called Arthur Herman. And he isn't even Scottish, but he does say this: it is time to let the rest of the world in on the secret that Scots have known for a long time, that without Scotland, the modern world would be a very poor show. Amen to that, brother. Amen to that. But the interesting thing about this book and how that relates to John Knox is that in the 16th century, John Knox wrote a book called The Book of Discipline. And in it, he made the case for a church to be located, a school to be located next to every church. It's interesting that we're here at the gate, who used to run a Christian school. In fact, the only Christian school in Dundee. But the interesting thing about that is that it took 80 years. He was gone by this point, but it was 80 years before the then independent Scottish Parliament decided to legislate by the Act for Setting Schools. Essentially what they did is they set up a school in every parish in Scotland, and they had a paid teacher running it. Now, what impact did that have is it unleashed an enlightenment that still impacts our nation to this day. People used to come north of the border, lords and ladies, and they would see the common people and they would note that they were more literate and more numerate than any other part of the world. The common people were literate and numerate. And this ricocheted throughout. That's just telling me that I need to be quiet. I'm just going to share this final reflection though. Ultimately, what this did was it led us to a point where we ended up with philosophers like David Hume and Adam Smith before any other philosophers were known with such international repute as these individuals. Why? Because Scotland pioneered education, and actually the churches were the pioneers of education, healthcare and welfare. What we did was we gave it over to the state, and by God, if they made a horrendous mess of things. But nonetheless, I'm going to share this with you. 2 years ago, my wife and I decided, and with this I'll close, to withdraw our kids from state education. So scunnered were we by lockdown. In fact, it was 3 years ago now. My wife is a qualified primary school teacher, and the standards of education in terms of maths and English are just plummeted. Now, at the time I'm thinking, is this the right move for us? But my good friend here, Dave Dixon, challenged me. He was one of the big influences on my wife and I, in fact. And he said, Ewan, he said, if you were to write up a list of the top 5 people that you want to influence your kids, who would be on it? And then he asked me, before I even had the chance to reflect on that and answer that, he says, how many of them are one of the current teachers that they have in school? And not one of the teachers that any of my kids were educated by would have made that top 5 list. If we're asking the question, who do we want our sons and who do we want our girls to grow up to look like, that can sometimes be a very, very dysregulating and discombobulating question to ask, but ultimately we need to know what the answer is. I'll tell you what, folks, I would not turn back the hands of time. The fact that we've got 13-year-old girls who are being asked if they're engaged in anal sex, what kind of pervert wants to know that information? Seriously, folks, where we're teaching kids that are 12 and 13 about anal sex, oral sex and masturbation. If you're thinking, what is this? rshp.scot, relationships, sexual health and parenthood materials, they're all there. Me and my wife sat on the day that we got the letter back from Dundee City Council saying your kids have been withdrawn from state education, and we sat and we looked through some of those materials. This is disturbing. So what's the answer? I'll be honest, I think to use a well-worn political term, we need to take back control.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. There's an awful lot to say after such profound introductions, particularly broadening the whole thing out and really situating education more broadly. I want to just narrow things down a little bit because I know that many parents are confused and really worried. And although Jim makes the point that it's adults in the room who have to really grasp the nettle and take these things on, I'm thinking really sympathetically of parents who ask the question, do I want a live son or do I want a dead daughter? And that's a very real question because the trans activists really elevate the risks of suicide in transgender young people. So keeping that in mind, I think one of the things that we really have to do in this campaign is to really understand what is being argued and where it's coming from. Now, I completely agree with the speakers who say, let's point the finger at the people who should know better. And I think the finger is very, very directly on this particular issue pointed at the Scottish Government, Education Scotland, and also the directors of education, who all sat on the committee that drew up the government's advice to schools in supporting transgender children. They all sat on this group, and it's very, very interesting that whenever they're asked about the transgender question, government spokesmen always dash to the forefront to say, we have got these policies, this framework to encourage equality and diversity in schools. You must have heard that a million times already. These policies are going to encourage diversity and equality in our schools. The government and these frameworks are not ideological. We do not promote any ideology. Well, what a lie. You only have to really look through this document supporting transgender pupils in school to know just how ideological it is. It's saturated with this ideology from beginning to end. So I'll just have Maggie's already touched on a number of elements from this, but I thought it's worth actually going into a little more depth on exactly how ideological it is. So I'm going to just run through 4 things if I have time. The first is exactly this idea that it's saturated with gender ideology. The second is it is full of quasi-scientific evidence to back up the fact that it needs to have this guidance for parents and uses some very questionable statistics. The third thing I think which is a real problem is this policy that Maggie's already touched on, this policy of affirmation and social transitioning, which is central to the government's advice. And the last thing, again, which Maggie raised, is that this document completely ignores the fundamental change that has happened in the age group and sex being referred for gender identity problems. the massive expansion of teenage girls. Teenage boys as well, but teenage girls. So that at the Tavistock Gender Identity Clinic, I can't give you the figures, by the way, from Sandyford Clinic in Glasgow, which is the main gender identity clinic for young people and children in the whole of Scotland. But for the Tavistock, this group represents 70% of children referred to gender identity services. So a massive increase over less than a decade. The document doesn't even mention it, doesn't go there at all. So, to begin with the sort of ideological background to it, this document was actually developed out of a document which was put forward by the LGBT Youth Scotland group called Supporting Transgender Young People. That document formed the basis of the government guidance. In fact, on this committee that drew up this report, along with the Directors of Education and Education Scotland and government representatives, with three transgender advocate organisations. Alongside that, there were other organisations to which these three transgender activists are affiliated. So there was hardly anyone on that committee that represented anything other than advocates for transgender ideology. The report is full of transgender terminology. You'll probably recognise most of it. Transgender identity, gender expression, trans girls stroke women, trans boys stroke men. As I said, it's endless. It's worth looking at the document to see just how ideological it is. One of the things it distinguishes, as Maggie has already pointed out, is the difference between transgender children and non-conforming children, non-conforming to gender, that is, sorry. But on the transgender thing, they say that it's an umbrella term, and it really covers those children or young people who feel their gender identity is different from that assigned to them at birth. Now, as Maggie says, right, this is really a term used to blur the whole sexing of children at birth, right? 99.8% of us were sexed at birth unambiguously, no question about it, on the part of doctors and on the part of parents. There was no question about it. That very small percentage of 0.2 you could call intersex or disordered development of sexuality. And it results, I think Maggie's already mentioned the fact that it could result from some chromosomal abnormalities and also from a few hormonal imbalances. And it just means simply that the sexuality is a little bit ambiguous. It's called intersex because you may have both male and female reproductive organs present. Right? Now, a lot of these aren't even evident at birth. A lot of them will only become apparent at puberty or even when an adult presents with infertility. So we're talking about a rarity. And the whole point to stress is intersex should not be confused with transgender, right? But it is confused with transgender. The whole ideology makes it very evident, you know, that gender assigned at birth, that whole idea. Just moving on, the sort of use of statistics. Here I think the report is quite frankly a disgrace. How any government could put out a report which includes 2 papers in evidence for all its statistics, 2 papers, neither of which have been peer-reviewed or appeared in any academic journal at all. One produced by LGBT Youth Scotland from a survey, one produced by what's called Transpulse, which is a group in Ontario, in Canada, done 10 years ago. And both of these use surveys, which are called respondent-led sampling. And basically what this means is you put out a sample through the internet and you invite people to actually fill in the survey. So it's a self-selected sort of thing. And on the basis of that, they then produce a number of very frightening statistics. So the other thing that they do is they say, oh, this is a survey of 700 trans people, or this is a survey of 450 trans people. But when you dig a bit further into it, actually it's only talking about 163 trans people, or people who identify as trans, or in the case of the Canadian one, it's actually only about 84. Now, you don't have to be a statistician to know you cannot possibly interpret for a whole community of people from a small study of 163 or 84 people who have responded to a survey on a self-selected basis. It's completely invalid, basically. But the statistics are worth actually iterating because they're very, very frightening for teachers or for parents who are reading them. So, just read them out. 82% of transgender young people experience bullying. Right? 63% have suicidal thoughts or have attempted suicide. 59% of transgender young people have self-harmed, and 83% experience mental health problems. Right? Now, you cannot, again, you don't have to be a statistician to know that you cannot draw conclusions like this of cause and effect from these sort of studies. But the Transpulse one is also very important. It is the one that only has 84 respondents, on the basis of which they're looking at supportive or unsupportive parents. So they say this, and they have in the report, do have a look at it, it's online on the government website. They have this very dramatic, what's called an infographic, right, with the information given, in pictorial form. So if you've got supportive parents, a transgender young person will only have a 4% chance of having suicidal thoughts or attempting suicide. However, if parents are unsupportive of their child's gender identity, then some 57% will have suicidal thoughts or have actually attempted suicide. So these are the sort of figures that have been included from really illegitimate studies in this report, and on the basis of which they say it is very important that teachers and particularly parents take note of this and immediately affirm children or young people who are coming forward saying that they identify as the opposite sex and they want to change their pronouns and change their name. And that's the really dubious part of this, this report. a neutral thing. This is quite a serious thing. Most of all, there's fairly good evidence that this sort of affirming, in other words, unquestioningly accepting what a child wants or says they want, and then using their name and pronoun, encouraging them if they want to change how they're dressed and how they appear. But not only that, of course, encouraging everyone in class to treat them as that, and the school as well. That has certainly got quite a lot to do with actually making these feelings, if you like, the psychology, much, much more entrenched in children. So you're encouraging children psychologically to see themselves as being of a different sex. The government makes quite clear in the document that social transitioning is really the beginning of a process in which a person will gain comfortability in their gender identity. What does that mean? It means that they will then have to proceed along a path. If they've got gender dysphoria now, that they're being socially transitioned, the answer then becomes to go much further, to change themselves, to change their secondary sexual characteristics. Now you can't change your sex, obviously, but you can change secondary sexual characteristics. So that you get the Sandyford Clinic in Glasgow will actually put forward children as young as 9 for puberty blockers. Little boys have puberty a little bit later, so they will often be 11, 12 before they are. But they have put children, young children, on puberty blockers, ostensibly to buy time to see whether the child will then move on and say, no, I don't want to change my sex. And similarly, early teenagers are being referred and put on puberty blockers when they may have started puberty. And these children, almost 100% of them, will want to go on to cross-sex hormones. So they will then go on to feminizing or masculinizing hormones, and when they reach the age of 18, they will be referred to adult services for gender reassignment, which is talking about surgery, mastectomies in girls, castration in boys, and so forth. So this is a process, and let's make no mistake about it. Social transitioning may well be the start of this process. The last thing is just to have a look at this group, this changing demographic of people who are referred for gender identity problems. This group of teenagers, mainly female, predominantly female, as I say, 70% in the case of those referred to the Tavistock Gender Identity Clinic. This is a very, very complex group of children. Hilary Cass, the paediatrician who Maggie referred to, who did the analysis of the Tavistock Clinic and found it to be clinically unsafe, made the point that this group of children who are coming out with identity problems have a very high rate of mental health problems like depression and anxiety. Almost 35% of the young people referred to the Tavistock had an autism spectrum disorder. A lot of them, a higher proportion than you would expect, are looked after and accommodated, or else have been the subject of abuse, physical and sexual abuse. Many of them may have eating disorders. Now, what's unique about this group of young people is that they, in fact, never had gender dysphoria. dysphoria when they were younger. The first time they come to experience this is as teenagers, early or middle teenagers. What is more, many of the parents of these children are quite adamant that they were assessed for mental health problems, that many of them have diagnosed problems, diagnosed autism, diagnosed mental health problems, and we know many of the children are looked after and accommodated. So the fear is the suicidal ideation due to these other problems, and it's got nothing to do necessarily with gender and trans identity. And this is the big, big worry, a real worry. Could it be, in fact, that a child with autism who has great difficulty with socializing, enormous problems communicating, really feels out of kilter with her peer group? Could this be driving her towards, this feeling of feeling dysphoria, that she might cure this problem if she actually transforms herself? Similarly, is the child who's got serious depression not actually searching for an answer to her distress? Is the child who has been looked after or who has been abused, their distress, are they looking for some way out of it? Is the child who's just experiencing puberty, hates the fact she's developing breasts, or hates the fact she's going to start menstruating, actually hating her body so much that this appears to be a solution? I think this is the danger, and this is the obvious problem with the government's whole approach. And as I say, it's absolutely appalling that this has become the guidance given to teachers. So as parents, I think, and as people who are wanting, if you like, to shout out about this, I think we do have to remember, though, that it is not easy. Many parents have experienced a great deal of difficulty questioning schools. But all of us, particularly those of us who perhaps have grown up children or no longer have children in school, speaking out, I think, is such an important thing, and I couldn't endorse that more.
Right, over to you guys. If you want to maybe open the back door for 20 seconds to get some fresh air in here as it's a bit hot. Right, has anyone got any questions or comments that they would like to raise? Feel free, I'll take as many as possible. Yes, the man here.
It was a question or a comment, but it was something that Jim mentioned at the start about what kind of Scotland are we projecting to the world. And I'm quoting something that our current education minister said: if we want Scotland to be a place where the rights of LGBT people are realised, where everyone's identity is respected and celebrated, we believe that our policies and actions abroad should be consistent with those at home. And the next paragraph effectively says the same thing, where it's almost like our education is hell-bent with this idea of projecting, not this only within our education system, but also abroad as well. And it's almost, it gives me a sense of worry where is the chance for my child over the next few years, where the education minister's got these ideas where not only does she want to have it in our education system, but make young people confident enough to actually project it to other countries abroad as well.
Very useful. Just keep taking some points now at the back.
Yeah, a comment and a question. So as a teacher, I've had the privilege of teaching sex education to secondary school students, and what I've found is that many of the students have massive questions and various views about this. This is not something that they are all agree with or all disagree with. but for them, there's a discussion that they want to have about it. And I think that that's a really important aspect, that they're allowed to discuss it, that they're allowed to have views, that they're not vilified for having one view or another, but together they're allowed to discuss that as well. The question I have is, what space do you think there is, or what role do you think there is for dialogue such as Ben Shapiro? Representing
Yeah. I was still the other night. He's the kind of rule boss, isn't it? Essentially, Holly at the back.
I'll just go on the back of that comment. I was speaking to a teacher recently, and we talked about the sex education problem, and I'm not sure to what extent in Scotland we use third-party organisations to come in and do it, but she said that she thought it was a good thing for teachers, non-specialists, to give these classes because they felt the shame in talking to students and therefore limited themselves to the basic facts. Whereas the external organisations come in, they want to ingratiate themselves to the kids. It's a kind of breaking down of boundaries that comes from these so-called specialists. So I don't know if that's been your experience being a teacher as well, that it keeps the boundaries there, having non-specialists speaking to the children.
I think there's certainly...
Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
Keep asking questions, yeah.
Yeah, I think Jim set the scene really well. The thing that worries me is the way that Western society is going is getting undermined, and this is a big cause of it. My kind of question is, how can this campaign succeed? And there's some good examples lately of how campaigns have succeeded. One is the GRR demos that forced the politicians in Scotland, at least some of them, to stand up and be counted about this issue. And our one is, as my wife here reminded me, the whole outsourcing now of the independence campaign, irrespective of what you think about it, it's actually the campaign that's driven Nicola Sturgeon's actions lately right down to the de facto referendum. So the point of this is campaigns have got a big role to play in this to force politicians. And I was looking at today, there's 370,000 kids at school in Scotland and 54,000 teachers. So there's probably about 1 million voters out there that have got direct involvement. They're a granny or granddad like I am, a parent, a teacher, a relative who are scared to speak out, as you also said. The place to speak out is at the ballot box. So my question is, you're going to need money, you're going to need to enlist people. I think everybody here's obviously behind it, but how to win this? Because this isn't happening just in Scotland. It's getting driven. If you read The Economist this week, a 3-page briefing about the whole pharmaceutical industry being behind this because there's a huge market for it. So I think it's fantastic what you're doing, Stuart. And I was at the indoctrination, not education one, as you know, I'm not on Southern, by the way. So really, it's kind of, when you collect it all together, I'd really like to hear what Jim's got to say. But one last thing, I'm talking about sex education when we were at school. My experience is, if you know David Steele, who was the president of the Scottish Parliament, his dad was our minister. I come from Lithgow. It was a school with Alex Salmon, in fact. His dad, who became the moderator, gave us sex education classes sometimes. And this is how crude it was in these days. He said about using condoms, this is how it used to be. If you don't use a condom, it's like going up up close and firing a machine gun. That's what we got told in these days. And that got me through quite a lot, actually. but I'd like to go back to, there's a Scotland that's getting lost here. I think Jim really positioned it well. And I don't think I'm completely on the same political side as you, but I've got a lot of respect for what you write in the papers these days and the way you stand up for it. And I think we need to get back to it somehow or other. And it's good to see some of the young people in here as well. That I'm 68. I'm at the youngest end of the baby boomers. Have got every chance. We were the luckiest generation in history in Western democracies, and I can't see that for our successors just now. And I wish you all the best.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I would just chip in that, and whether this is the best way or not, but if everyone in this room walked up to the local primary school now and said to their teacher, "We'd like to talk to you about this," that would have an impact. Now, whether that's the best thing to do, I'm not a big fan of campaigns outside schools necessarily. There's kids there, but if you did it with respect, with dignity, with balance, and did something like that, walked up to the council, everyone in this room walked up to the council building and said, I'm sorry, this is not acceptable.
Yeah.
I think something could happen. Anyway, the lady here.
Yeah, we actually did just that. Actually, that's the reason why I'm here. The school that my kids go to, we approached the kind of school to say, we want to know what you're teaching our kids, could you share it with us? And they told us, no, it's school policy, we can't show you the curriculum. At which point, my husband and I were absolutely enraged. There were a lot of emails that flew back and forward, mostly from my husband. At which point he got a phone call to say, you know, this is it's a prevailing attitude, this is what we are trying to, we have to teach it. So my question is it actually about empowering schools? Because the feeling that he got is they actually don't want to teach gender ideology, they're kind of like, oh, we're just going along with it. But they enforce it. Like, to tell me that I can't look at the curriculum that my child is being taught, and then they actually just gave us highlights, and I told them my children will not be sitting in anything to do with the whole PSHE. So my daughter and my kids are not doing anything. They're now going to sit in the library and do study hour. So it's an absolute
I'll bring it up just to try and get lots of people in. Part of the problem is it's not just in the RSHP curriculum. That's part of the problem, because this is a kind of it's this
mainstream.
This sort of the framework is meant to be embedded in every subject sort of thing. So it's a problem. There's still all hands. So yes, Jim.
Hi, I'm James. I've been half in and half out. You probably all recognise me from being the doorman. So the things that they're chanting outside are trans rights are human rights. We're here, we're queer, we have no fear. And trans liberation for the next generation. And there was a speech, I only heard little bits of it. If only I'd known what I know now when I was 11 or 12, I wouldn't have, couldn't make it out. Because you were talking. So that's what's happening outside. And they've got quite an audience, they've got quite a megaphone, they seem happy and enjoying themselves, and they're pretty persuaded that we're wrong. And my question, I think, is for the campaigners, the people who know how to change minds and persuade people. I'm looking at Jim Sillers, because I suspect you've got a few years of this under your belt. Should we worry about them, or should we look to the majority of the middle ground, the 99% of Aberdonians who are at home doing their normal lives? They're not here in this room, and they're not across the road. Should we worry about them?
Okay. Yep.
Hi, thank you very much for the speeches. It was really, really nice to listen to what you guys had to say. I agree with everything that has been said in all the questions, and I actually I'm kind of wondering similar thing to what you were wondering, but more like I feel like a lot of the young people are very confused, and you touched a little bit on social media and like all of the things that they are exposed to that we don't see because of how the algorithm works. So that being said, like yes, education in schools is really important to not be propagating this, but there is a bit that we can't quite control because it is on their phones. So how can we reach people and young people who are out there protesting right now and are not wanting to actually have a conversation because they're refusing to be challenged and they're refusing to challenge anything, they just blindly go with it. Like, I'm really sorry and I don't mean to make fun of anybody, but it's a counter-protest or debate. Is it just me that thinks that you're counter-protesting a protest? So it technically should be a protest out there, but like, sorry, not from here. And again, like, it is something to do with how do we reach those people out there, and is there a space in even higher education for conversations like this? Because it's a dangerous ground to be in, and people don't feel safe to speak their opinions out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's whether they're the people we need to talk to, but young people are people we need to talk to, and we need to think of a way to inspire young people. I think, and whether we can do it through this, but this idea that you need to develop character, not identity, right, is really, really important. There's a brilliant article by Lionel Shriver in a magazine called Unheard, which you can read, which explains this really well, but we have to be able to inspire and engage with young people as well.
Yeah, on the subject of we're here, we're queer, we have no fear, right? I don't believe that. I went over to speak to a fine young man who was carrying a sign which said Stuart Wayne is a bigot. Right, and I thought this was very interesting, so I went over and I started to engage him in conversation.
I hope you've got a photograph, because I want to put that on Facebook.
I've got a photograph. To be fair to the lad, he did look, I said, do you know him? And he had the decency to look a bit sheepish and a bit embarrassed and say, no, I've never met him. But the people round about came to his rescue and said, but he's published his views, his bigoted views, in the Guardian, right? So I was impressed right away by that. And after a little bit, there was a realisation that they weren't going to get anywhere discussing the issue. So it then went to objecting to me having a camera on them, right? Which I thought was odd because they're protesting, they're trying to get a view across, and I'm there recording the view and asking them questions about the view, and they didn't want it. They felt that was a problem. And then it went to standing next to me with a megaphone with an alarm on it so that no one could hear anything. Right? So I went and said, do you know him? Right? What makes you think he's a bigot? And the entire edifice collapsed, and then it became, we're just going to make enough noise so that you can't hear anybody. So they are not without fear, because they're actually very afraid of argument. But the other people I think they're afraid, and this is one of the things where you might, lend them a spine, is the politicians who sat there in these committees and let LGBT Youth Scotland, an organisation mired in the abuse of children, write the guidance based on, as you so eloquently explained, rubbish. We do need politicians, if they're going to stand up and they're going to take the cash for leading us, to have the courage to ask the awkward question, which is this valid? And we're not going to risk our children unless you give me a really convincing answer. Where's the courage in them? So I think the people outside do have fear, but the people in the parliamentary committees in the parliament, they certainly do, because they won't challenge them.
Yeah, I do think that the useful thing about the pamphlet we're going to produce, Jenny's going to have all the statistics and facts about what's actually happened here. But the statistics and the arguments that they use are really fraudulent. Really, really fraudulent and shameful that they present their arguments through these really vacuous, no academic. If a student of mine passed that, I said, you'd fail them. Right? It's that bad, and yet that is used as a basis to justify guidance document on something as serious as this. It's absolutely shameful. Yes.
Hello. I'm a post-op medically diagnosed transsexual. I got gender reassignment, full gender reassignment 30 years ago, and I'm biologically male. I didn't change sex, and you can't change your gender. The trans rights are human rights out there. I keep asking the question, what rights don't I have? And I'm bulletproof. I mean, whichever you take me on. But the trans rights, most of these trans activists out there aren't even trans. And I'm detransitioning. I'm actually after enough. I've got a lot of transsexuals. And the only thing, I don't have kids. I've got the joyous thought that when I die, that's the end of the family line, because I am gender full bifter. But I had chronic gender dysphoria. But these kids are brainwashed out there. I mean, they say, oh, trans rights and trans people should think that. I despise them. Oh my God. The flag out there, you know who created that flag? It's a transgender called Monica Helms, Roger Hogg, who used to steal women's underwear, was a cross-dressing fetishist, and wrote erotic stories about little girls who never aged. And they're wrapping the flag around the guy who created that. I mean, that's the level there, and they've got no idea. I mean, the trans activists are the ones that are causing the problems for trans people. I've got a lot of trans friends who are like, oh God, they're absolutely shocked about it. Incidentally, I don't go into female spaces. I just don't go into your spaces at all. Why would I? Because I'm not female. And actually I would feel uncomfortable, but the whole trans rights is driven by these trans women are women. I got that at my work until I burst that little bubble. It's after, they're after the trans won't go after the men. They won't go after them because the men are physically stronger than them. They'll accuse them of being bigots and what have you. But it's very much trans women's rights they're going after. That GRR bill was designed for controlling women's rights. It's the safe space. So make no mistake, that's what it's about. The underlying, the pharma companies, that comment that came up with the pharma, that's spot on. Forbes magazine released why is the trans market, a kid from the minute of diagnosis is worth something like 100,000 to 300,000 per kid. So it's a $3 billion marketing opportunity. And gender clinics have shot all over the place in USA. So as back to the gender identity, like I say, you cannot change your gender, you can't change your sex. I would know, I've got no idea what it is to be a woman. The only woman I know is an adult female, that's it. And the non-binary, change your pronouns and I'm valid. You're either non-binary or binary, which is a binary system. And then when you get a he, I'm a he, they, right, mate. So when a beautiful woman goes by, is that a non-binary erection you have? So that's my side. I'm only coming. I mean, I don't have kids, but I'm ruthless. I'm ruthless on the class, but no diplomacy.
We'll quote you on the non-binary erection. Hold on,
just to let you know, we have to leave because it's time to break our fast.
Right, okay.
Just remember the last time we met, we're going to meet with the councillors. We're going to force the schools through the council to stop children. And we need to push that.
Right.
And any time, any day, we're all ready, yeah?
Right.
So,
great. I've got a gentleman here and then a lady there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say we're just discussing about facts. So you have to think about education. The facts is the very basic part of education. As soon as you go beyond facts, you're immediately starting to have a system which you interpret those facts by. So we have to understand that as we educate our kids, you can't be neutral about it. We keep saying, let's just teach them facts, which is fine. But as soon as you start thinking about those facts, you're going to automatically start to add a system to it. So these people are being genuine because they're putting their own system on it. So we have to think about what is our system. Historically in Scotland, that system has come from Christianity, and the schools have had that bias. And you want to go back to that, you have to make that decision. And the other comment I wanted to make is that as we think about this problem we're having, it's the straw that's breaking our back. So we need to remember, think about, this may be the last thing, but there's a whole host of things that have gone before that, which we also need to consider. Why are we at this place right now? There's a lot of things that come before that. We've been telling our kids for a long time they can be whatever they want to be through Disney. It doesn't just happen just because they've now switched all the way to gender. There's a whole host of things we need to backtrack as well.
I just wanted to say a few words that I really enjoyed tonight's meeting, and the speaker is more than what I expected. Really enjoy it, and hope it continues, in the future. But the thing is, I'm discussing it at the government, not just the rest of the government, at the top, people what they're doing, but Biden and Sturgeon and all, isn't it? But it's been driven by a bigger agenda, 21 to 30, and it's the WEF, the World Economic Forum, that's driving all this. And this is only part of it. They want to destroy sort of social culture, all over the West. But people should look into that. They meet in Davos every year in January. I'm just disgusted at the government, and it's immoral what they're doing to our children. Anyway.
Great. Thank you. Right, and the last one before the speakers. Sorry, we'll have to.
I'm surprised at how many parents still don't have any idea what's going on. I spoke to my daughter's friend who has children at primary, and she was horrified because she knew nothing. And then she spoke to her friend And she was horrified because she knew nothing. And then my friend just the other day said that her granddaughter came home really upset from school, and she was asking her what the problem was. And she said, I'm never getting married. Never, never. I won't let anyone do that to me. And that's the stuff she was being told in school. Just really traumatised her.
Right, well, first of all, if you don't mind, just a quick correction about the Christian schools in Dundee. There's loads of Christian schools in Dundee, they're all Catholic ones. That was just a weak point. And over and above that, I think just in our everyday conversations with people, we need to stop using the term gender so much, women, sex, because that term has kind of just taken hold, and even everyone who agrees with what's been said here says gender. If you get a form from school or the doctors, it's got gender, male or female, score it out, write sex, get that back so that we look at, because that's what the school want to know. Are you a boy or are you a girl? Not are you masculine or gardening or what are you asking me? So just use the term sex when that's what you need.
Fine, thank you for that. Now we're rushing, so two of our speakers got to get a train in 5 minutes, so I'm going to let them come back first. They can leave, then we can continue with our two speakers who can say their bit, and then hopefully you will fill our little pot up with all your money and go right. So that.
I've been over 60 years in politics, and this is not the first time I've met a minority with an ideology that had a disproportionate effect on some aspects of our society, certainly within the trade union movement and within the labour movement. You'll never have heard of them. For example, the International Marxist Group were the left-wing equivalent of the folk across the road. And I've got to give you this advice. You won't be able to change their minds. They're closed. They are 100% certain that they are correct, and you are 100% wrong. And never the twain shall meet. The real target is the politicians at governmental level and at local level, and the head of the bureaucracies in education, that's the directors of education. And that's your target. Forget about those folk over there. You're not going to convert them whatsoever. The folk that you should be talking to are the hierarchy, but also the parents. Because you're quite right, most folk don't know what's happening inside school. And it's how you campaign there. I can tell you from experience, there's nothing a politician is upset more when he's roughed up at a meeting by the electorate. Because at the end of the day, you're a politician, you're in a position, but when the ballot boxes come, you're the same as everybody else, and if you don't get the votes, you're finished, you know, as far as governmental power or local governmental power is concerned. So what my advice would be is that parents should organise to go and see the convener of education in Dundee and ask him, first of all, do you know what's going on in the schools? You may be surprised by the answer, which is probably ignorant. And then you want to see the director of education. Then you want to see your MSP. And you get a group of them, all very civilised, but pressure, questions, all the time, and warnings that you're going out to the wider public to make known what's happening, and ye better beware at the ballot box. Now, you've got to build up a campaign. You can do that locally, but you've also been able to get to the parents and the grandparents. And the grandparents are very, very important, because all over the world, grandparents worry about their grandchildren more than they ever did about their children. So what you do is you go from meetings like this to bigger meetings on Tayside, and then you go and you go to national rallies where you actually attract the media's attention that here something's happening that's going to have a profound effect on the political lives of those in Holyrood at the present time. And just finish, just forget with the folk at the other side. You can't talk to them because you're talking a different language. Get to the parents and get to the hierarchy in education. Rough them up verbally with questions that demand answers and demand change. That's the way to do it.
You won't get better advice than that, and all I can say is I took part in a meeting in Portobello that was organised by local parents, and there was Portobello in Edinburgh, hell of a stushy. But one of the things that came out of that was the need for parents, and this is talking about on the ground, because you can't, when you have a meeting like this, you're not going to get 90% of parents won't come because they'll be scared, they won't be involved. Tupperware parties. That is, get hold of parents at the school gate, parents, grandparents, organise meetings in your houses that they don't know anything about, they can't intimidate you, organise in groups of 6 and 8 and 10 and spread the word and get everybody. So that now there's other groups of parents meeting in other areas of Edinburgh. They're all having Tupperware parties in their house, which is an easy thing to do. And that's how you grow things. So I mean, everything that Jim said, I totally agree with, and I think that's just a very practical way to go forward, so that one parent on their own is dismissed, 2 parents even are cranks. When you've got 10 parents raising it at a PTA and going up and doing a deputation to the council education committee, which we did, we went and did a deputation to the whole council. But we can all do those kind of things, but yeah, organise together so that you create a strength, a movement, and they will be surprised. But exactly as that, they need to know that that's the end of their political careers. So yeah.
Right. Can we give them a round of applause? As they leave the building.
Been a great meeting so far.
Okay. Thank you. Over to you.
Well, that's been an interesting evening. Thank you so much for all your questions, comments, feedback. A couple of summary points from me. One of the ladies said tonight, one of the parents said that they went to the school and asked what is being taught. This stuff isn't hidden in a war chest somewhere. This is online. This is in the public domain. rshp.scot. 8 letters. That's the website. All the lesson plans, all the PowerPoints are there. If you want to find out what your kids are being taught in school or what could be coming down the line, there's your website. The idea, I'm sorry to burst the bubble over here, but the idea of the Catholic education as the white knight of righteousness that we're all waiting for is baloney. I spoke to, listen, I'm going to say, okay. I'm sorry. But the Scottish, I spoke to the head of the Scottish Catholic Education Service. I'm sorry, it's not. Okay, I spoke to the head of the Scottish Catholic Education Service told me, when I asked him about RSHP materials being taught in schools, he said that we can't stop it, Ewan. He said, the Scottish Government is where the money comes from. He said, so we can't stop this. And Katrina Taylor, who's a lovely teacher, who was a head teacher of a Catholic school in Glasgow, told us just a few months ago at the Glasgow meeting that she literally had to throw this stuff in the bin. She had 6 months so to retirement, so she did it. But the bottom line is, she said, we can't stop this stuff. It's coming down the track, and we're being taught that we need to teach this stuff. I think the fundamental issue that this all boils down to is that there's a chasm opening up between the politicians and the people. That's the issue here. We've been told about the ballot box, but I think it goes a stage beyond that. I think we have to resist at every level. And I think some of the recommendations that have been made about going and speaking to your teachers, to the head teachers, to the convener of education in Dundee House, I think that's the right thing to do. But there's also a crisis, and I'm going to say this in close, there's also a crisis, I talked about the crisis of identity, there's also a crisis of identity in our politics. We have a Conservative Party that are no longer conserving anything. We have a Liberal Democrat Party that are neither liberal nor democratic. We have a Green Party who never talk about green issues anymore. We have a Labour Party that wouldn't know a labourer or a working class person if it hit them in the face. And we have a party that is apparently committed to independence that doesn't believe, nor is it actively pursuing independence. So where do you go in your political system when you have nothing that is representing your views? I think what we need to do is we need to take back autonomy, take back power, as I said earlier on, and take things into our own hands.
I must say I was very heartened by the teacher who pointed out that it is...
I've lost my train ticket.
Oh, no.
No, it's okay, that's okay.
It's the values if you want.
No, that's fine. Sorry about that.
No. Stranded in Dundee. We should have suggested somebody offer him a bed for the night.
He's got a spare room if he wants it.
Okay. I was just about to say, I was very heartened by the teacher who said that actually it's very possible to have a discussion with young people about these issues, that they are not of one mind at all. They may be confused, and a good factual discussion with some material, to guide it, I think, is an excellent idea. I'm not sure how many teachers feel equipped to lead that kind of discussion, but one part of the Scottish Union for Education is looking at the broader problem, really, in schools, not just around the transgender issue, but of actually teaching in whatever subject a very balanced point of view, and being absolutely meticulous about not being ideological about questions, but promoting a real discussion. One of the ways is perhaps to set up a debate in which young people can actually take different sides and have to actually have a proper debate. That's one possibility, but it does take, I think, a unique teacher, but we should all be aware that there may be teachers, and perhaps go to them and ask them, what they're doing about these issues in schools. I think the other thing is it is important to try and get information into the hands of parents. Information which will make them feel confident when they go to schools about saying that they really want to understand what is being taught around the questions of sexuality, transgenderism, and so forth. Because I think that begins to challenge this idea that teachers should remain to some extent remote from this and bring in third parties. I think that
maybe in an instinct, teachers want to preserve, you know, a certain aura around them, and that teaching the nitty-gritty of sex education may be quite difficult. I think that's what's happening. But I think it is a matter of strengthening people with information and the confidence to actually make these arguments. And just to say that I, amongst anybody in SU, in the Scottish Union for Education, would be very happy, you know, to come to meetings of parents, because often these will need to be informal things. Where just a group of parents get together to have a discussion and if you like, give each other moral support, perhaps, to go further. But I think that's one way in which we can actually enable parents and possibly even teachers, you know, to gain more confidence about these questions. The other thing I would really strongly urge everybody here is to take the time to look at the government's, report, or if you like, their advice to schools on transgenderism, just to get an idea of just how severe the problem is. But also, as people have suggested, to have a look at the sex education site. It is all there. You don't have to go to the school to ask for exactly what the curriculum is. That doesn't guarantee that you'll know what is being taught, because these third-party groups are really using this as a free-for-all to push their agendas. There's no doubt about that. But the actual curriculum is pretty worrying in itself. So particularly for people who've got the time to just look through these things and then discuss it with other parents, or, you know, with other grandparents, etc.
People say, what should we do? I'll tell you, at one level, I haven't got a clue. I mean, I've just kind of set this up because I think this is mental. There's loads of stuff going on in education which is bonkers. Why don't they just teach maths and English and history and geography? Right? Instead of overloading it with all sorts of other issues, overloading teachers, I'm sure, with all sorts of other issues that you don't want. And so that's the framework, education, not indoctrination. It makes sense. We're trying to do research on this. We need people to write for the Substack, to do research for us. We want to create parents' reps, possibly, in regions, right, who can then report, we get emails of parents to tell us the stories. I can make big media splash out of that. That's what I can do. We'll hopefully, I'm happy to come. If you can get 5 or 10 parents together anywhere around this area, I'm quite happy to come along and have a chat with them about it. Teachers, I think, would be massively influential potentially. If you can get a group of teachers, we want to get a network of teachers across Scotland. We want to have more conferences. We're going to have road shows in every city and town that we can around Scotland. So get in touch with us. Send us information, all that stuff that Jim Siller said as well, in terms of how we then, who do we go to, how do we build up a campaign, how do we put pressure on, who do we put pressure on. If you've got ideas, great, come and tell us, and we'll try and facilitate it as best as we can. But I genuinely think that the benefit of this, right, I'm on the left of politics, right, and I was like those groups he was talking about, that was me, right, that was me on the far left, right, and, you know, I think the far left stuff I was involved with was pretty good, as it happens. You know, anti-racism, gay rights, women's rights, all that stuff, I've got no problem with that as far as I'm concerned. I think that was good. What's happening now, I don't think it's good. I think it's absolutely terrible. And I think it's, as people say, a lot of this stuff can be seen as abusive in terms of what's happening with children. And something needs to be done about it. And I genuinely think the majority agree with us. That's why I think we've got a chance. I genuinely think the majority of people in Scotland would agree with us if we sat down and chatted with them about most of these issues.
Yeah, we're just being steamrolled by like a media brainwashing machine.
Well, I don't think we are. I think most people disagree. I think most people disagree with what's happening in schools. It's just most people don't know that this is happening. They get on with their life, get on with their job, as you do. Well, that's what, if we can reach out and tell people as much as possible about what's going on, I think we've got a chance. Anyway, thanks again to the speakers, thanks for coming. Genuinely, if you've got any cash, either donate online or put something in the tin, because we need to pay for everything and we don't have much money. Thank you again.